Hey there, lovely folks. Before we jump into today's fascinating tale of a brush with death, I've got an awesome announcement. I'm giving away $25 to one lucky subscriber. To enter, all you need to do is subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment. But here's the kicker. To increase your chances, you gotta watch the full video. The winner will be announced in an upcoming video. So, let's not waste any more time. Engage with the video, get those entries in, and let's dive into today's captivating near-death experience. Story 1. At work, I was surprised to get a call from one of my employees who wanted to know when I would be back at my house. After hearing that the person in question was already present in my house, I assured them that I would be there in approximately 30 minutes. Someone advised me not to be wearing my glasses when I got there. I ignored their advice. As a result of that statement, I had a good idea of what would happen when I got home. I'm a little over 140 pounds and stand 5 feet and 6 inches tall. The individual who came to visit me in my home stood 6 feet and 1 inch tall and weighed 190 pounds. The individual in question was extremely intoxicated and bitter that I had passed him over for a promotion. Consequently, he made the decision to quit his job and assault me at the same time. I was removed from my pickup truck in an abrupt manner. He strangled me from behind the cab by reaching across the toolboxes and grabbing my throat. I was able to pry his hands off my neck and shove him away, but then he ran towards me and punched me in the face as he approached. I grabbed him around the torso, pinning his arms to his sides, and considered bringing him to the ground as I held him there. I was unable to get enough leverage to throw him down, so I lowered my grip on him and grabbed him around the legs and buttocks. When I picked him up, I started to stagger backwards, and the heel of my boot caught the edge of the sidewalk as I was walking backwards. I was the one who ended up landing on the back of my head after falling backwards, and he ended up landing on top of me. I suddenly became unconscious after experiencing a horrible crunch in my neck. This is where I got my first experience. I had the sensation that I was all by myself in the darkness, and I was acutely aware of myself in that darkness. I noticed a dot of light that was about the size of a match head. The tiny speck of light started to gradually expand, and when it had reached a size comparable to that of a baseball, I started to understand that the light wasn't actually getting bigger. Rather, I was moving closer to it. I noticed that the closer I got to my destination, the quicker time seemed to pass. It felt very much like riding in a small vehicle that was open all around, had no top, short sides, and other features similar to those found on roller coaster cars. I have to admit that I was terrified by what was going on, but at the time, I did not make the connection between my fears and the prospect of passing away and going to heaven. It appeared as though everything was taking place at once, or that time had stopped, or that it had lost all meaning. Time did seem to stand still. On the other hand, I don't think I spent more than a few minutes in that location. When I finally arrived at the light, it was as if all of a sudden I was surrounded by nothing but the purest, brightest white there could possibly be. I suddenly became aware of the most tranquil, pain-free, fulfilled, and euphoric state that is possible for me to conceive of. In all of my years spent on this planet, I've never before felt so content and at home. I had the impression that there were 3 or 4 other people in the light, but the brightness of the light that surrounded them, as well as the light that surrounded me, prevented me from seeing them clearly. The way they were standing gave me the impression that they were on a wide flight of stairs leading upward. I had the impression that there was someone of greater significance a little higher up those steps that I was unable to see at all, and that this individual was undoubtedly the origin of the light. I thought the other beings I saw might have been angels, but I couldn't make out their features clearly enough to identify them or describe them in any detail. They were roughly the size of humans, but because they were obscured by the light, I was unable to get a good look at them. After being there for about a minute, just standing there thinking about how incredibly good I felt, a voice that seemed to be all around me asked, "Do you want to stay? Or do you want to go back?" I can't recall whether these are the precise words that were used, but that was the implication being made. It's possible that those words were just constantly running through my head to the point where they gave me the impression of being spoken aloud, but I can't say for sure. I was aware that I needed to make a decision, but it was not simple for me to choose. Even though I really wanted to stay, I had to answer either to myself or out loud that I needed to go back for my daughters, who were 8 and 12 years old at the time. Even though I wanted to stay, I had to go back for them. In a flash, I found myself moving through the dark, exactly in the opposite direction from where I had come. The light was initially quite dim, but as I approached it, it grew in intensity. I encountered a roadblock that I was not allowed to pass, or I was forced to turn around against my will. Definitely. It was up to me to decide whether to stay or go back. I am unsure whether this was a question that was asked out loud or whether I just strongly felt it myself. After making up my mind, I got back to work right away. When I got there, I found myself supine in the backyard, staring up at the clear sky while lying on my back. I had a fantastic feeling and couldn't focus on anything other than the place that I'd recently seen. After what seemed like a minute or so, I made the decision to stand up. I had the sensation that I was moving my arms in an attempt to roll over, but nothing actually happened. I quickly came to the conclusion that despite the fact that my fingers were being instructed to move, I was unable to wiggle them. It took me approximately 15 minutes of lying down in my backyard before I was able to roll over and get up. My mobility was gradually returning, but there was no discomfort for me to experience during this process. I went into my house, started thinking about being attacked, and then made the decision to check myself to see if I was going to have a black eye from being punched. When I stood up straight again after washing my face in the sink, I noticed that I could see stars. I also noticed that my shirt was ripped halfway off, and I had some very distinct imprints of the attacker's tennis shoe in my forehead and face. In addition to this, I realized that my shirt had been ripped about halfway off. In addition to that, he had pounded on my stomach and chest, leaving them bruised and scratched. After a few moments, a car hurriedly pulled into my driveway. The driver seemed to be in a hurry. The assailant's brother-in-law, who I considered to be a close friend, came running towards my house as the attack was taking place. After he looked me over, he said, "We're going to the hospital." After that, I opened the door for him. My friend told me on the way to the hospital that his intoxicated brother-in-law had gone to his house and confessed to killing me. This happened while my friend was on the way to the hospital. When I was at the hospital, I went to the emergency room and asked if there was any way that they could check out my back. I told them I had an accident after falling off a ladder. After taking an X-ray of my back, they found that the second vertebra, T2, in my neck was fractured into 3 separate pieces. Even as I laid there on the X-ray table waiting for a special collar to be brought over, I did not experience any pain from it. After those 4 days, I went in to have T2 and T3 fused together using a piece of rib bone taken from the back of my body. Everything went smoothly while I was recovering from my injury over the next half year while wearing a Sawme head brace. I had suffered a contusion to my spinal cord, which resulted in the temporary paralysis. Therefore, I'm a very fortunate person to be able to walk. After nearly 16 years, I do not find that I have forgotten what it was like to go through the experience. It has actually provided me with a lot of comfort regarding death and the things that await us after we pass away. I have discussed this with a large number of friends and family friends, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to be with some loved ones as they passed away in the past 2 years. I urged each and every one of them to keep searching for the light and to not be afraid to approach it. I take solace in the fact that I will eventually be able to count myself among them. Even though I have COPD and have to use oxygen therapy around the clock, I have absolutely no fear of passing away. Everything there is to know about the universe indicates that there is a God, and I believe that God is the light that I witnessed and stood in. Story 2. After I was stabbed, my sister took me to the hospital, which is situated a little further than a mile from the location where it took place. Throughout the entire ordeal, she was yelling at me to stay alive. I was trying to keep my composure, despite the fact that I was coughing up blood. My arms and legs were starting to feel very numb, which was a sign that my body was starting to shut down. As the strength left my body, I looked up to see the flashing red and blue lights that denoted the entrance to the emergency room of the hospital. They appeared to be remote from us. I remember reassuring my sister that I was not going to pass away, but urging her to get moving as quickly as possible. My head was resting on my arm as I leaned forward and laid it there while the index and middle fingers of my right hand were pressed into the wound. My blood was warm, and it felt so good against the chill of my skin, and I thought to myself, so, this is it? The last conscious sounds that I remember are the screams coming from my sister. It seemed as though everything was happening at the same time, or that time stopped or lost all of its meaning. I've never stopped wondering how long I was gone. It was impossible for more than a few minutes to have passed between the moment I lost consciousness and the time I arrived at the emergency room. However, it felt as though I'd been unconscious for a considerable amount of time. Hours, maybe? I lowered my head and focused on getting ready for whatever was going to happen. My religious upbringing instilled in me the knowledge that there would be a glorious light and a calm. I suppose that's what I've been waiting for all along. Instead, I found that my attention was drawn to the tiny lights that appear whenever one closes their eyes very tightly. They were moving around at a very rapid pace at first, but after a while, they started to slow down and eventually became fewer and fewer in number, until there was only one left. My field of vision was filled with a single pinpoint of light that seemed to bounce around, leaving behind a trail that seemed to build upon itself and create patterns that were either geometric or web-like. These forms appeared to be two-dimensional to me at first, but as I thought about them more, I realized that they were actually growing in size and intensity until they were three-dimensional. I extended my hand in an attempt to come into contact with these forms. A light that was yellowish brown in color and had a feeling on its own grew in the shadows behind what I saw. It was very calming to look at and gave off an inviting vibe. At that point, I did not experience any fear. I had the sensation of moving through the patterns that were left behind by the light, almost the same as when you walk through a room or a house that is covered in cobwebs, but I never had the feeling of being touched. The sensations of movement intensified, and before I knew it, I was moving at breakneck velocities. When I think of this, images of astronauts undergoing training while inside of a large centrifuge come to mind. On the other hand, I was progressing through something. I'm not sure if I was in a tunnel, a tube, or a large open space, but all I remember is that I was moving. I was able to make out various voices in my head telling me things like, "Remember, you have to let them know," and "You're being shown." It seemed as though there were many voices emanating from a variety of locations, but the underlying message was that I should pay attention to what I was going to see and that I was supposed to remember it. Do not forget. I started to reflect on my life and wondered if it was going to be like what my auntie always said would happen in the afterlife, that our lives would be replayed for us and we would be judged based on how we lived them. But as I was thinking about it, I could see all of the things I did throughout my life just as they happened, but faster, displaying the positive, the negative, and the ugly aspects of each. I kept everyone in the dark about everything I was proud of, as well as every embarrassing little secret I had. But there it was, and this time, instead of feeling fear and shame for any transgressions, I felt remorse and shame. I was able to see very clearly that we all have things that aren't great in our histories, but I also realized that we have to take responsibility for everything that we do. I was able to see other people at what appeared to be a lower level than me. I didn't have the sensation that I was floating above them. Rather, I had the sensation that I was observing them from a higher vantage point, but that my feet were resting on air. I could make out hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people wandering around without a clear destination. Every single person gave off potent vibes of dread, agony, and anxiety. I heard a voice say, "These are the lost." And I looked around. After that, as if it had been reading my mind, it said, "This is real." I began to feel afraid, but even my anxiety was nothing compared to the fear that I got from the people around me. I couldn't help but wonder, what is in store for me? I could feel my level of intoxication rising as time went on, far more drunk than you could possibly imagine. I had no control over the situation. I yearned for something or someone that I could cling to. I could hear laughing and giggling that had a childlike quality to it, but it also had an air of seduction to it, as if it wanted me to believe that it was something other than what it actually was. But my inhibitions were controlled by the alcohol. I could feel a form approaching me that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, and neither alive nor dead. Every time it laughed, I had the impression that it was making fun of me. It was beginning to transform into a woman as it lay down and spread its legs out, a key step in the process, like none I'd ever seen, very alluring and attractive in appearance. She used all of her considerable strength to drag me down. Again, she let out a chuckle. This time, it was done with a very deliberate intent. I was aware that the pain in my chest was starting to come back. I cast my eyes downward. It was covered in blood in every single spot. The being started soaking in it like a fish. I felt something grab me. "Get out of here," and "What are you doing here?" are two common commands. I was surrounded by people who were pulling and tugging on me. The question, "Why are you here?" When I looked down, the woman was no longer there. A young girl appeared in her place. She sat up and grinned at me as she did so. I had the impression that I was in a lot of trouble and that I had done something inappropriate. Was I a bad person? The flow of blood continued unabated. I began searching the area desperately for assistance. There were none of them. People started shoving me away and shouting at me. "Remember to tell them," as they tried to get me to move away from the crowd. The following thing I picked up was someone exclaiming, "He's conscious." "What's your name?" And "What's your social security number? How did you get stabbed?" And "Do you know the person who stabbed you?" were the questions that were asked. It seemed like there was no end to the questions, but I was still breathing. This is how the beginning of my new life looked like. Everything there is to know about the cosmos. The only form of consciousness does not come from biological life. There is another perspective, and we will be held responsible for everything that we do while we are in this location. Heaven, or whatever you think of when you think of it, is a real place that does exist. Hell as well, or whatever you choose to call it. Since then, I have entered treatment for alcoholism and have been sober for the past 4 years. In addition, I have finished all of the coursework required to earn my Master of Arts in Teaching degree, overcoming my addiction so that I can be a better husband and father to my family. The worst of it is all of the negative effects on your body, such as reduced lung capacity and weight gain. I've developed a heightened sensitivity to the plight of those who describe themselves as lost. I'm frequently asked to talk to young people about the choices they'll make in this life and how those choices will affect them in the afterlife. Many people have informed me that I've made statements about them that I could not possibly have known about. This is something I've never done before.